So 2016 is coming to a close, and I wanted to do a year-end pound-for-pound list. Right now, as 2016 is ending and 2017 is getting off to a start, we have some fights scheduled early next year that might determine the pound-for-pound list, depending on the results. You know, fights like DeGale Jack, and then if you go further into the year, maybe Thurman and Garcia and some other fights might affect the pound-for-pound list. But as it stands right now, at the end of 2016, 2017, just around the corner, wanted to give my year-end pound-for-pound list. So here we go. Now, before I get into the actual fighters on my list, I just wanted to give just a quick second into pound-for-pound criteria, or the variables. Now, this varies from each person, and this is where the argument gets going between boxing nerds, right? Where there's different criteria and different people value things more than others, right? So you take recent accomplishments a fighter might have had versus their overall accomplishments. And overall accomplishments, in my opinion, includes your amateur career. You look at guys like Guillermo Rigondeaux and Vasily Lomachenko. They have brief, limited professional careers, but look at what they did as amateurs. You have to take that into consideration in their overall body of work. But then you look at recent body of work. And sticking with those two fighters, Rigondeaux had that big win against Nonito Donaire a few years back. But if you look at the last year or so, it's Lomachenko that's done more in a pound-for-pound sense. So what do you rate more? For me, it's a mix. You have to take the overall body of work into consideration, but you have to consider the recent body of work, the level of opposition, and the activity rate of fighters. There are some fighters out there fighting once a year. There are other elite fighters fighting 2 or 3 times a year. All those things come into consideration. Here's another sticking point that fans go back and forth on, and it's which rate's higher, a fighter who has titles in multiple divisions or a fighter who has multiple titles in one division? So let's break that down. You might have a fighter like Roman Gonzalez who has won 4 titles in 4 different weight classes, but hasn't necessarily cleaned out any one weight class. And then you have a fighter, let's say like Gennady Golovkin right now, who's cleaning out the middleweight division. What do you rate higher? You go back and you look at Floyd Mayweather, who was the pound-for-pound #1 for a while there. He never cleaned out a single division in all his body of work. He pretty much would win 1 title at a time in different weight classes. Then you had other fighters in that same era who cleaned out entire divisions. You know, Andre Ward did that at 168 pounds. Joe Calzaghe did that before he did, and even more so than Andre Ward because he fought and got all the titles at one point. So there's different nuance there, and some people rate those things differently. Then there's who have you beat, and then how did you beat them? So some people look at the fighters you've actually beat, and you look at, again, let's take Roman Gonzalez. He had a couple of close wins this year over Mick Williams Arroyo and over Carlos Cuadras, 2 very good fighters, 2 of the top 5 fighters in those respective divisions. I think one was at 112, one was at 115, but close wins. You look at the Andre Ward-Sergey Kovalev fight. Whoever you thought won that fight, and there's a lot of debate on it, it was a very, very close fight. And then you look at other pound-for-pound level fighters, like let's say a Vasily Lomachenko, a Terrence Crawford, may not have fought opposition that was on that level, but they were so utterly dominant in their wins, you have to take that into consideration as well. There's also who you fought, but there's when you fought them, where you fought them, why you fought them. In other words, the terms, the gray area, the minutia between the fight. Floyd Mayweather was a master at this, where he would fight people that were either a little too green, weren't quite yet ready for him, or just over the hill and were just past their best, and that's when he'd fight them. Or he'd have them come up in weight, come down in weight. There were catch weights. So those are things to look at. There are so many intangibles. There's so much gray area in between the white and black. Drug testing. How much do you value drug testing? Right now on your pound-for-pound list, is it important that a fighter be enrolled in VADA if you rate them on your pound-for-pound list? So there's all these things to consider, and we can argue back and forth over all of that. If there's any criteria I'm missing, let me know. Comment below and let me know, because I'm probably missing a couple of things. But all that being said, let's go ahead and get into my list. At number 10, I have a Japanese fighter that if you haven't seen him yet, you're missing out because there's some talent over in Japan. Shinsuke Yamanaka has held one of the 118-pound titles for 5 years. He's been a bantamweight titleist now for 5 years. Can't really rate him any higher on this list because he hasn't unified titles, hasn't left Japan, but he's held on to a title for so long and been one of the top fighters for so long now in those lower weight classes. You have to put him on this list. And the bantamweight division is a strong division. If you look at his body of work, he has beat some good fighters over the last few years. And if you're holding a title for 4 or 5 years in one of those lower weight divisions where they seem to change hands all the time, that is an accomplishment in and of itself. So he's number 10 on my list. Number 9 on my list, another Japanese fighter who has the potential to climb much higher in 2017 on my pound-for-pound ratings, and that is Naoya Inoue. Now this fighter has already won titles at 108 and 115 pounds. At the time I'm filming this video, he's already fought twice. He has another fight scheduled at the very end of this year, so he will have fought 3 times in 2016, which I think is very important for elite level fighters to do. So here you have it. He's won titles in multiple weight classes now, and he's fighting keeping very active. Very, very important. Number 8 on my pound for pound list is Carl Frampton, who is absolutely one of the top contenders for 2016 Fighter of the Year as well. But this year alone, he unified titles at 122 pounds, beating Scott Quigg. Wasn't the most thrilling fight, but those were 2 undefeated fighters. Frampton got the win. And then he came over to the United States and fought Leo Santa Cruz to win the title at 126 pounds, another undefeated fighter. And now he's slated to rematch Santa Cruz in January. So that's a fight that could potentially affect pound for pound list as well. But keeping active, titles in different weight classes, unifying titles in one division, that's pound for pound stuff. Carl Frampton absolutely belongs on the pound for pound list. Number 7, Saul Canelo Alvarez. Now, I can hear some groans with this one, considering all the catchweight stuff and the Canelo weight stuff and the stalling on the Gennady Golovkin fight. His promoter, Oscar De La Hoya, has doubled down, saying that Canelo will fight Gennady Golovkin next September, and I still believe that that fight is going to happen. In the meantime, look, he had 2 dominant victories over Amir Khan and Liam Smith this year. Now, Khan was a guy who was a very good fighter, but was fighting above his best weight. Liam Smith really wasn't that great of a fighter, although, you know, he had a nice looking record that was mostly built upon weaker opposition. But looking at overall body of work for Canelo, people forget, man, this guy fought Austin Trout. He fought Irizlandi Lara when he didn't have to. He fought Floyd Mayweather way before he was ready. He was still way too green for that kind of fight. But that experience he got in those 12 rounds with Floyd Mayweather has absolutely made him a better fighter. He continues to look better. Still could cut the ring off better, but the guy has the eraser, as we saw this year, scoring a knockout of the year candidate over Amir Khan and a good solid body shot knockout of Smith. He has that eraser. He has underrated head movement and upper body movement. His feet could move better, but in a pound for pound sense, I think you have to consider Canelo as a top guy just based on the overall level of opposition he's had in the last 5 years or so. However, if he doesn't fight Gennady Golovkin or any other 160-pounder, top 160-pounder at 160 pounds in 2017, he needs to be taken off all of these lists. He's lost all credibility. They're talking about him fighting Julio Cesar Chavez Jr., possibly at a super middleweight fight, some sort of catchweight at the super middleweight division. If he goes for the money for that fight, I get it, I understand. All is forgiven if he fights Gennady Golovkin. If he's competitive in that fight, he might stay on the list. But he's quickly losing credibility. I keep him on my list right now based on the overall body of work. Number 6, Manny Pacquiao. The Filipino legend has proved with 2 quality wins this year that he is still a top fighter in this sport. beating Timothy Bradley in dominant fashion for a third time. I don't care what the judges said about the first fight. Pacquiao has 3 dominant wins over Timothy Bradley, a guy that Floyd Mayweather never fought, a top-level fighter himself, who I think will be in the Hall of Fame one day. And then for Pacquiao to dominate a much younger Jesse Vargas and put him down. And Vargas is a guy coming off a very good win off of Saddam Ali, who gave Timothy Bradley a very, very close competitive fight in 2015. I think it was a very good year for Manny Pacquiao. I really, really hope that his team does the right thing and they go after Terence Crawford. There's talk that he might fight Vasyl Lomachenko. I could live with that. I don't love that fight. I like it a hell of a lot better than the rematch against Floyd Mayweather. I hope that never, ever happens. If Pacquiao fights Lomachenko or especially Terence Crawford next year, that says a lot about who he is as a fighter. But at this point, he's still one of the best in the game, even though he's well past his best and just going through the motions at this point. Number 5, Gennady Triple G Golovkin. I hear some of you groaning already because, in your opinion, Gennady Golovkin just simply hasn't done enough. But several of the criteria I pointed out before, owning a division, unifying titles, being dominant, being active, he meets all those. And then you take into consideration the overall body of work with what he did in the amateurs, winning the silver medal in the Olympics, and he was robbed. He should have had a gold medal. Over 300 wins in the amateurs. And now he is signed on to face an elite level opponent, Danny Jacobs, who is the second best middleweight in the world right now behind Golovkin. Look, that's a match of the 2 top fighters in the division. By rights, it should be for the Ring Magazine Middleweight Championship, but Canelo Alvarez has that, even though that lineage has been kind of perverted. This really is the best fight that could be made at the middleweight division as it stands right now. So with Golovkin, he has all the criteria he meets, and he's finally facing an elite level opponent. If he beats Danny Jacobs, and if he beats him in extremely dominant fashion, he shoots right up the charts on the pound-for-pound list and further legitimizes himself. Number 4, Vasyl Lomachenko. I talked about him before with the amateur pedigree, which goes into that overall body of work I talked about. He won a title at 126 pounds, moves up, his first fight at 130 pounds, fights for a title against one of the top fighters in that division and utterly dominates him and stops him. Then he fights Nicholas Walters, who has been one of the top fighters in the lower weight divisions in recent years, and he utterly dominates and makes him quit in that fight. So considering how dominant the guy's been, how much he has improved in just a few professional fights to date, I think it's clear that Lomachenko is the best fighter from 126 to 130, and those are 2 loaded divisions. I think he just needs to continue to stay active. He still hasn't got that real true pound-for-pound elite level opponent. It would have been great if him and Guillermo Rigondeaux fought each other, but that fight is done. It's not going to happen. And Rigondeaux has been so inactive and hasn't done anything to rate pound-for-pound consideration since beating Nonito Donaire a while back. The fight really doesn't make sense right now. But I think overall, based on everything we've seen, Lomachenko is clearly one of the top pound-for-pound fighters in the world. Number 3, Terence Bud Crawford. I think Crawford had a very good, underrated year in 2016, and he kind of fell under my radar, I have to admit, because he's just a quiet guy. And that win in July over Victor Postol was on pay-per-view. Nobody bought it. It wasn't a very good, thrilling fight. I talked before about Frampton Quigg. It was kind of along those lines, but he was so dominant in that fight and unified titles at 140 pounds, created a new lineage because that was the fight between the top 2 guys in that division. And people forget, he had a title before at 135 pounds, and he went on the road over to the UK to get that title. So now you look at a guy like Crawford, titles in multiple weight classes. He's unified titles, and he's the linear champ now at 140. He's taken several guys' O's. He fought 3 times this year and was dominant. Didn't hardly lose a round in 2016. Scored 2 knockouts. I don't know what more you want from the guy. If he can't get Manny Pacquiao next year, Crawford just has to do what guys like Golovkin and others are doing and just keep fighting often and keep being dominant, and he will continue to climb up the pound-for-pound ratings. 2A and 2B. Andre Ward, Sergey Kovalev. I can hear some more groans from some of you, depending on which way you sided on this fight. Some of you may feel that it should be 2 and 3 with Kovalev 2 and Ward 3, and some of you might feel that Ward should be 2 and Kovalev should be 3. Either way, that fight, I don't care what the judges say, I side more with the 3/4 of the boxing fans and boxing press and experts and managers and trainers that thought Kovalev clearly won. This fight was so close. Neither man did quite enough to distinguish themselves as clearly pound for pound better than the other at this state of their career. A lot of you keep saying that Andre Ward was the smaller guy. He's not. He actually fought at a heavier weight than Sergey Kovalev in the amateurs. He won his light heavyweight gold medal at 178 pounds. He was basically a little bit of a weight bully when he drained himself to make 168. Not as egregious of a weight bully as someone like Canelo Alvarez or Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. or any of those guys, but a little bit of a weight bully. And 175 is his natural weight. And if you looked at him and Kovalev, they're the same damn size. In fact, Andre's a tad taller and longer than Sergey. And they fought on almost even terms, except for the fact that I thought Kovalev did a little more damage to Ward and deserved the win. But these guys are right there. They're not quite number one pound for pound until they settle their business. They have to do a rematch next year. Fight has to happen. Andre Ward, regardless of what he's saying right now, I think is just being tough with the negotiating. I think he's just playing a little bit of chess. I do think the rematch happens, and when it happens, we get a decisive winner, then we can separate these guys. But right now, they're tied at number 2 pound for pound. And my number 1 pound for pound fighter in all of boxing right now, Roman Chocolatito Gonzalez. I think this is a no-brainer. And if you don't have him number 1 pound for pound, you don't know the lower weight divisions, and you're just an ignorant boxing fan or someone who calls themselves boxing media, and you need to educate yourself. What Gonzalez has done is very, very impressive. And let me just put this in a numbers perspective for you, okay? He's won titles at 105, 108, 112, 115. So that spans 10 pounds. Some of you hear that and you think, it's only 10 pounds. I could gain 10 pounds in the gym or by cutting weight or bulking up. I can gain 10 pounds in a month. 10 pounds ain't shit. Well, when you start off at 105 pounds, 10 pounds is a lot. And when you do the math, that 10 pounds is 9.5% of the guy's body mass. So he basically, almost 10% of his body weight, he has moved up the charts and continued to fight elite level opposition. And again, in that first fight at 115 pounds, he takes on the guy who is arguably the best in that division at the time and beats him. So imagine whatever weight you are. Well, let me say this. Imagine you at your best weight, all right? Whatever sport you played back in high school or college or whatever it was, you at your best weight, add 10% to that. And ask yourself, would you be just as good as you were before? That's what Chocolatito Gonzalez has done. And for some of you who want to put Andre Ward in that spot and you still continue to say that he moved up in weight, because technically he did. He fought at 168 and then moved up to 175. If you look at the body mass index there, the increase, it's about 4%. It's less than half of what Gonzalez has done. So in a pound for pound sense, gaining body mass index and continuing to fight, often active, fighting elite level opposition consistently, not once every 5 years when you get all the terms dictated your way. Andre Ward, it's Chocolatito. He's done that. He is the best fighter in the world right now, and it's criminal that he's so underappreciated. The thing is, diehard boxing fans do appreciate this guy, because if you look at the top 20 premium cable ratings this year in boxing, I think Chocolatito was on 2, had 2 of the top 20 ratings, 1 in the top 10. That shows you that boxing fans, truly knowledgeable, astute boxing fans, appreciate this guy, and they should. He's the best fighter in the world. Now, there are fighters on the bubble, like Guillermo Rigondeaux, who I talked about before, who has just been too inactive and too much of a non-factor and doing too much matchmaking on Twitter to be considered. He needs to get back in the ring and do something that's pound for pound worthy. If you feel that Rigondeaux should be up there in the lower half of the top 10, maybe where I had Shinsuke Yamanaka or one of those fighters, I hear you. I can live with that. But right now, just based off his lack of activity and the weird business decisions he's made in the last few years that have held up his career, I just have him off my list. And there's other fighters like Timothy Bradley that you may feel should be on the list as well. And I appreciate that. It's just he fought once this year against Pacquiao and was so thoroughly dominated, right? So he needs to get active as well. But there's talk that he might be back in the ring during the first half of 2017. And if he scores a big dominant win, he's back on the list. I talked before about fights coming up, like Frampton Santa Cruz 2, like DeGale and Jack, like Thurman Garcia. There are plenty of fights coming up already scheduled in the first half of 2017 that are going to affect this pound for pound list. But this is who I feel are the top fighters in the sport right now based on all the criteria I opened this video with. I want to hear you guys pound for pound list. Where do you agree? Where do you disagree? Comment below, like, share, subscribe. I'll see you at the fights.